In 2015, 19-month-old Jazira Thompson was left home in Houston with her two 3-year-old siblings while their mother and her boyfriend went out for pizza. During the 2 hours they were gone, one sibling stuffed her into the oven and the other turned it on. When the couple returned, the two older children were frantic and crying in the kitchen, pointing to the oven and babbling in panic. In the chaos, the appliance had tipped over onto its side, preventing the small children from lifting it to free her. Inside, Jazira's small body was curled up, with burn patterns showing she'd been alive when the heat began. Her legs and feet blistered from pressing against the hot metal, and scuff marks on the door where she desperately kicked to escape. She eventually died from full-thickness burns and shock before help had any chance of arriving. The mother, Raquel Thompson, and her boyfriend Cornelius Williams were arrested and charged with 4 counts of child endangerment. Both faced up to 20 years in prison for leaving the young children unsupervised in a house full of hazards. Serial killer Richard Ramirez spent nearly 24 years on California's death row before dying in 2013 from complications of B-cell lymphoma at age 53, never having been executed. In the weeks before his death, advanced liver failure reportedly turned his skin a vivid green, with several prison sources claiming he looked like a green highlighter pen. Despite being sentenced to death in 1989 for 13 murders and various other violent crimes, he died of natural causes while still awaiting execution. This box contains hundreds of knee replacements that outlived the people they were implanted in. During cremation, the human body is reduced to ashes, but artificial joints survive the furnace intact. They're removed afterward, collected like this, and often recycled into new products, with many crematories donating the proceeds to charitable causes. Poker champion Victoria Corin Mitchell once sought therapy to overcome her fear of flying, but in a cruel twist of fate, her therapist was later killed in a plane crash. The tragedy reinforced her long-standing phobia rather than curing it, and she's avoided flying ever since, often traveling by train or boat instead. They thought she was just a sweet, innocent grandma, but behind her front door was pure horror. In the 1980s, California woman Dorothea Puente used her Sacramento boarding house as a hunting ground for the vulnerable. She took in the elderly, the homeless, alcoholics, and people with mental illness, those with monthly government checks and no family to worry about them. Once they trusted her, she allegedly drugged them with heavy sedatives, suffocated them in their sleep, and buried them in her backyard like garbage. Tenants began mysteriously disappearing, but Puente kept cashing their social security payments and forging signatures as if they were still alive. Neighbors complained of a foul stench and constant digging in her yard, but police believed her every time she claimed the tenants had simply moved out. In 1988, police finally searched her property and dug up body after body, unearthing 7 decomposing corpses hidden in shallow graves. Even then, Puente was so calm and grandmotherly that officers let her step outside to get coffee, and she fled the state. After a nationwide manhunt, she was caught and eventually linked to at least 9 murders, though many believe the real number was far higher. This photo shows 23-year-old Jaleel Smith Riley breaking down in tears as he receives a life without parole sentence in a Cincinnati courtroom for the 2013 fatal shooting of 22-year-old Portia Brooks during a botched car robbery. He had attempted to retract his guilty plea and expressed remorse, but the judge denied both motions, citing the brutality of the crime. In the courtroom, the victim's mother held her daughter's ashes, while her sister said the sentence was the only just outcome for the loss inflicted on her family. At age 21 in 1974, Robert Maudsley strangled John Farrell to death after Farrell showed him photos of abused children. He then turned himself in and went on to kill a convicted child molester at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, and in 1978 murdered 2 more predatory cellmates in a single afternoon, coldly telling the guards there will be 2 short on the roll call. Deemed too dangerous even for high-security inmates, in 1983, authorities locked him in a Hannibal Lecter-like glass cage in the basement of an English prison. He typically spends 23 of every 24 hours alone there with no contact with other prisoners. By 2023, he had spent a record 16,000 days in solitary and will likely remain in isolation for the rest of his life. Here's a photo of a young Japanese boy waiting for his turn to cremate his dead baby brother in Nagasaki. When the guard said, "Give me that load, boy," he replied saying, "It's not cargo, sir, he's my brother." Photographer Joe O'Donnell said the boy was biting his lips so hard to avoid crying that it was bleeding. The intense heat from the bomb caused the Urakami River and nearby water sources to boil. Many survivors, desperate and disoriented, jumped in to soothe their burns, only to collapse and die as their bodies cooked in the water. By the next morning, hundreds of swollen, burned corpses floated through the city's waterways. One of the first Japanese cities that the US planned on nuking was its former capital, Kyoto. The only reason it wasn't bombed was because US Secretary of War Henry Stimson spent his honeymoon there and thought it was a nice place. So instead of Kyoto, they targeted Nagasaki. Nagasaki was home to Japan's largest Christian community, many of whom were descendants of persecuted, hidden Christians. Within seconds, tens of thousands were wiped out, including priests, nuns, and entire families. Some scholars believe this made Nagasaki the largest single massacre of Christians since ancient times. Because so many doctors, nurses, and emergency workers were killed instantly, many survivors went untreated for days, their flesh rotting while still alive. Entire families died huddled together, slowly bleeding, burning, or vomiting to death. Even months after the bombing, farmers in the outskirts of Nagasaki reported finding charred body parts, arms, legs, fragments of skulls scattered across rice paddies and hillsides, having been blown out of the city by the blast. On August 6, 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was on business in Hiroshima when the first atomic bomb exploded. The blast ruptured his eardrums, blinded him temporarily, and left serious burns all over his body. 3 days later, he returned to his job in Nagasaki, and his coworkers called him crazy as he told the details of a single bomb destroying an entire city. Just a few hours later, a second atomic bomb was dropped nearby, wiping out most of Nagasaki, but Yamaguchi survived yet again. He's the only man who's officially recognized for surviving both nuclear explosions. Danny Masterson, best known for playing Stephen Hyde on That 70s Show, lived a double life that ended in one of Hollywood's darkest scandals. In 2023, he was convicted of raping 2 women in the early 2000s, crimes he had long denied while reportedly using his fame and influence in the Church of Scientology to silence his victims. The women testified that the church pressured them not to report him and even tried to discredit them when they did. Masterson was ultimately sentenced to 30 years to life in prison, a staggering downfall for a sitcom star once seen as a laid-back cultural icon. In 2025, 6-year-old Gunnar Hyatt of Mount Carmel, Illinois, died just days after his birthday when he suffocated from inhaling helium out of a Mylar balloon. Investigators say the cause was consistent with helium inhalation, a danger many parents don't realize can kill within minutes by displacing oxygen and cutting off blood flow to the brain. The Wabash County coroner used the tragedy to warn that oversized helium balloons, often seen as harmless party decorations, can become deadly when inhaled, a reminder of how quickly something festive can turn fatal. Before the atomic bombings, Japan had planned for a horrific biological attack on California. Submarines would launch planes to drop fleas infected with bubonic plague over San Diego, hoping to trigger mass death and chaos across the U.S. Scheduled for September 1945, it was only halted when Japan surrendered weeks earlier, narrowly preventing one of history's deadliest biological attacks. During the war, Japan's military forced tens of thousands of women, many as young as teenagers, into sexual slavery. Known as comfort women, they were trapped in military brothels, raped by dozens of soldiers each day, and often left broken by disease, pregnancy, or suicide. Survivors who later spoke out described it as a daily death they were forced to endure for years. When Japanese troops invaded Nanjing in 1937, the city descended into 6 weeks of unrestrained horror. Hundreds of thousands of civilians and prisoners of war were executed, often by machine guns, bayonets, or mass burnings. Up to 80,000 women were systematically raped, sometimes murdered immediately after, and sometimes mutilated as a warning to others. Eyewitnesses described rivers flooded with corpses and roads so littered with bodies that walking became impossible without stepping on the dead. And perhaps the most horrific of all, Japan's Secret Unit 731 in Manchuria carried out some of the most sadistic experiments in history, using men, women, and even children as disposable test subjects. Some prisoners were deliberately infected with painfully deadly viruses, then dissected alive without anesthesia so doctors could study how the diseases destroyed living organs in real time. Others were tied to stakes while grenades or flamethrowers were tested on them, or left outside in sub-zero cold until their flesh blackened with frostbite, before doctors hacked off limbs one by one to see how long they could survive. Some had their arms amputated and reattached to the other side of their body, while others had their entire skin slowly peeled off to see how long it would take them to die. In all, tens of thousands of people were killed through torture disguised as science, and not a single test subject ever made it out alive. Perhaps most shocking of all, many of the doctors who oversaw these experiments walked free after the war, trading their horrific research to America in exchange for immunity. This 1982 photograph captured 18-year-old Patty Gifford celebrating New Year's Eve in Fort Lauderdale just hours before she would disappear forever. The man standing behind her was 22-year-old Dennis Sokor, who prosecutors said kidnapped, raped, and strangled her after she rejected his sexual advances later that night. Patty's friend unknowingly photographed him in the background, creating the image that ultimately helped investigators identify her killer after he fled the state. Sokor later confessed to the murder, though he never revealed where he dumped her body, leaving Patty's family without a grave for more than 4 decades. Her boyfriend never married, hoping she'd one day be found so they could be buried together, but he died in 2020 before that wish could be fulfilled. On July 14, 2026, after spending nearly 40 years on Florida's death row, Sokor was executed, apologizing for his crimes in his final statement, while Patty's remains are still missing. This haunting photo shows an early radiation therapy session from the 1930s, when doctors used x-rays to burn away skin diseases or tumors with terrifyingly primitive equipment. The patient's head was clamped perfectly still so doctors could fire high-dose radiation at specific areas of the face. Because the dangers of radiation were barely understood, patients often suffered brutal side effects: severe burns, scarring, hair loss, blindness, and even cancer years later. In some cases, radiation was even used to treat acne or blemishes, causing far more damage than the condition itself. In May of 1973, a man walked into a bank in Ontario with a rifle and a bomb wired inside his own mouth. The device was connected to a dead man's switch, meaning if he released the pressure or was killed, it would immediately explode. He calmly took hostages and demanded money, claiming there was another larger bomb hidden inside the bank. When he tried to leave the building with a bag of cash, police snipers opened fire. The moment he was hit, the switch released, detonating the bomb in his mouth and blowing up his head and upper body in front of everyone. Investigators later found a second device inside the bank containing 200 sticks of dynamite that could have wiped out the entire building, but it was luckily defused. The man carried several fake IDs and was so badly mutilated that he's never been identified. 4 planes were hijacked on 9/11, but few people know there was almost a 5th. United Flight 23, bound for Los Angeles, was already taxiing for takeoff at JFK when the FAA suddenly grounded all aircraft after the Twin Towers were struck. Among the passengers were several men who immediately raised red flags with the crew. Flight attendants later said they were asking odd questions about the flight, demanding to move into first class, and even tried to open the cabin door before takeoff. When the grounding order came, the men reportedly refused to deplane at first, sitting in eerie silence while the other passengers panicked. Even more suspicious, after the flight was emptied, security discovered box cutters hidden in the seatbacks and food stashed under the seats, items disturbingly similar to those used by the 9/11 hijackers. Investigators came to believe Flight 23 was meant to be part of the coordinated plot, possibly targeting the White House or another iconic landmark. But because of the grounding order, the plane never left the runway, leaving behind one of the most chilling what-ifs of 9/11. In February of 2000, Australian slaughterhouse worker Catherine Knight murdered her partner John Price in their home in Aberdeen, New South Wales. After an argument, she waited for him to fall asleep and stabbed him 37 times as he tried to escape, with blood evidence showing he made it to the front door before collapsing. Once he was dead, Knight used her butchering skills to skin his body in one piece and hung the skin on a meat hook in the living room. She then decapitated him and placed his head in a pot of boiling water, along with pieces of flesh to make a stew. She also cooked parts of his glutes in the oven and arranged 2 dinner plates with meat, vegetables, and gravy, each labeled with the names of Price's children, indicating she had intended to serve them their father. Police discovered the staged meal, the pot on the stove, and Price's skin hanging inside the house. Knight pled guilty to murder and in 2001 was sentenced to life in prison without parole, becoming the first woman in Australian history to receive that sentence. In October of 2015, 21-year-old Dutch medical student Sophia Koetsier vanished while on a Ugandan safari after stepping away for a bathroom break just a short distance from her lodge. About 3 weeks after she disappeared, searchers found her belongings in eerie condition. Her purse and one shoe neatly placed on the ground, while the other shoe was never recovered, scraps of her fabric tied to branches like trail markers, and her underwear bizarrely hanging 15 feet high in a tree. No blood, remains, or sign of a struggle were ever found, as authorities quickly wrote it off as a wild animal attack, though experts noted that predators don't hang underwear in trees or arrange items so deliberately. Her mother has spent years fighting the official explanation, describing how it felt like the earth had simply swallowed her up, since not even a single fragment of a bone has ever been recovered. Nearly a decade later, Sophia's disappearance remains one of Africa's most haunting safari mysteries. 17-year-old Louisiana girl Caitlin Strait was 28 weeks pregnant when a road rage incident suddenly ended her life. She was shot in the head, declared brain dead, and doctors had to perform an emergency C-section to save her baby. She and her friends were simply driving when another vehicle pulled up and opened fire. Even worse, police said they had no idea why the shooter even targeted them. There was no crash, no argument, no warning. The teen was rushed to the hospital, but her injuries were irreversible, and she was kept alive just long enough to deliver her premature baby. To this day, the killer has never been found, and the motive remains a mystery. In September of 2025, 21-year-old University of Kentucky cheerleader Laken Snelling was arrested after her roommate called 911 to report finding a dead newborn in their off-campus home. The baby boy was found wrapped in a towel and shoved into a black garbage bag in the back of a closet. When first responders arrived, the baby was described as cold to the touch, suggesting he had been there for hours. Police later learned Snelling had secretly carried the pregnancy to term, delivered the baby in silence, and left him hidden before leaving the house. She was later taken into custody and charged with abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant. Since her arrest, Snelling has withdrawn from the university and is no longer listed on the school's cheer team. If convicted, the felony charges alone carry up to 5 years in prison and thousands in fines. She was released on a $100,000 bond and is currently under house arrest with her parents in Tennessee as investigators continue to determine the baby's cause of death. Orlando Brown, who played Eddie Thomas on That's So Raven, has endured a bizarre and highly public downfall marked by addiction, homelessness, mental health struggles, and repeated run-ins with the law. Once a Disney Channel fan favorite, he's since been arrested for drug possession, faced assault charges, and made an infamous appearance on Dr. Phil, wearing eerie snake-eye contact lenses while making erratic statements. As his troubles have played out in a chaotic mix of arrests, unsettling public behavior, and strange interviews, friends and former colleagues have publicly expressed fear for his life. In 2004, Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh, the great-grandson of Vincent van Gogh's brother, was murdered in Amsterdam for his film Submission, which criticized the treatment of women in Islam. His killer, a radical Islamist, shot him, stabbed him, and nearly decapitated him, leaving a knife in his chest with a note threatening the film's co-creator. Rebecca Sherrick has hyperthymesia, an extremely rare condition that lets her recall every single day of her life in vivid detail, even memories from infancy. While it may sound extraordinary, she describes it as a curse that she can't turn off. Every embarrassment, heartbreak, and trauma plays back in her mind as clearly as the day it happened, trapping her in moments that most people get to forget. At age 15, actor Chad Michael Murray's intestines twisted around themselves in a rare medical emergency called a volvulus, cutting off blood flow and rupturing vessels. The blockage caused massive internal bleeding, and he collapsed before being rushed to the hospital. Doctors cut him open twice in desperate surgeries, untwisting and repairing his gut while removing damaged sections. He lost half of his blood, drifted in and out of consciousness, and lay so close to death that his family discussed last rites at his bedside. He was quickly hooked up to a critical blood transfusion, saving his life but leaving him with permanent scars and a gut rebuilt from the inside out. These haunting photos from 1960 show Otto Frank, the sole survivor of the secret annex, returning to the attic where his family hid for 2 years during Nazi occupation. In August of 1944, the Gestapo raided the hiding place after reportedly receiving an anonymous tip, though the betrayer was never definitively identified. This 2007 photo captured 8-year-old Christian Golchinski receiving the folded American flag from his father's coffin. Marine Staff Sergeant Mark Golchinski, who was killed by enemy fire in Iraq. The image became one of the war's most haunting symbols of sacrifice, a child forced to accept a flag in place of his father. In June of 2011, Jackass star Ryan Dunn left a bar in Pennsylvania in his Porsche 911 GT3 after posting a photo of himself drinking just hours earlier. Minutes later, he was dead. The car was obliterated after slamming into a tree at over 130 miles per hour, killing both he and his passenger, newlywed Navy veteran Zachary Hartwell. The wreckage was so violent that the engine flew more than 100 feet from the car, and the impact tore the vehicle into 2 burning sections. The death was eerily foreshadowed. A year earlier, Dunn played a man killed in a drunken crash in the film Living Will. Friends had joked that his Porsche was a widowmaker that he'd eventually wrap around a tree, and in a 2002 interview, he said he'd probably die in a ridiculous way. The loss sent Bam Margera, Dunn's best friend, into a years-long spiral of alcoholism, depression, and multiple rehab stints, marking the start of his personal decline. The death left the Jackass crew devastated and sparked ongoing debates about drunk driving in the entertainment world. In 1984, while filming Armor of God in Yugoslavia, Jackie Chan attempted what should have been a routine stunt, jumping from a wall onto a tree branch. But the branch snapped, sending him plummeting headfirst onto a pile of jagged rocks. His skull immediately cracked open, driving bone fragments deep into his brain. Emergency surgery saved his life, but not without leaving a permanent hole in his skull. Now covered by a plastic plate he can still feel to this day. Melissa Nelson worked as a dental assistant in Iowa for over 10 years before being fired. Not for poor performance, but because her boss found her irresistible. He told her that if his pants ever bulged, it was her fault, and claimed that her presence alone threatened his marriage. Despite the clear sexual undertones, Melissa sued him for discrimination and lost. In a shocking 2012 decision, the all-male Iowa Supreme Court ruled that it was legal to fire someone for being too attractive, as long as it wasn't based on gender, but on personal feelings. Kimbo Slice rose from viral backyard street fights to become one of the most recognizable names in combat sports, turning his YouTube fame into careers in MMA, boxing, and the UFC. But just months after his final fight, he was rushed to a Florida hospital, suffering from severe abdominal pain, nausea, and shortness of breath. Doctors discovered his body was completely shutting down. He was in advanced congestive heart failure, his kidneys had failed bad enough to require dialysis, and a mass had been found on his liver. Although no official cause was announced for why his health had deteriorated so rapidly, he was placed on the waiting list for an emergency heart transplant. Just 3 days after being admitted, Kimbo died at the age of 42, leaving behind 6 children. After becoming an international superstar with her 1990 hit Nothing Compares to You, Sinead O'Connor's career became overshadowed by controversy following her infamous 1992 appearance on Saturday Night Live, where she tore up a photo of Pope John Paul II to protest child abuse within the Catholic Church. She was widely criticized at the time, and the backlash permanently damaged her career. Over the following decades, she spoke openly about living with mental illness, struggled with periods of severe depression, and faced repeated personal hardships. In 2022, her 17-year-old son died by suicide after going missing, a tragedy she described as completely devastating. Just over a year later, in 2023, O'Connor was found dead in her London apartment at the age of 56. A coroner later determined she had died of natural causes. In 2012, an Icelandic TV station accidentally aired an episode of the Teletubbies with subtitles from HBO's The Sopranos, leaving children watching cheerful characters while captions referenced murder, dead dogs, drugs, and impotence. The bizarre mix-up was spotted by an adult viewer who photographed the screen before the broadcast ended. Just months later, the channel shut down completely and its archives were destroyed, meaning the original footage is believed to have disappeared forever. Today, only a few blurry photos remain as evidence that the surreal broadcast ever happened. Just 7 days after being released from prison, Aaron Tucker had less than $2 to his name and was on his way to a life-changing job interview when he watched a car flip over and begin filling with smoke. Knowing the bus would leave without him and he'd miss the interview, he ran off anyway, pulled the badly injured 61-year-old driver from the wreck moments before it caught fire, and used his own dress shirt to stop the man's bleeding. Tucker missed the interview but saved the stranger's life, and after his story went viral, donations topped $50,000 within days, and employers lined up to offer him a second chance. Morbid Facts, Part 690. Best known for her role on Modern Family, Sarah Hyland has undergone 2 kidney transplants and over a dozen surgeries due to a life-threatening condition called kidney dysplasia. While filming the show, she would often hold herself together just long enough to finish a scene, only to collapse in pain as soon as the camera stopped rolling. After her first kidney transplant failed, she spiraled into depression and revealed she had actively planned for her suicide, feeling like a burden to those around her. For years, she quietly endured chronic pain, medication side effects, and body image issues, all while playing the role of a bubbly sitcom star. In 2017, a petty argument over a $2 Call of Duty wager spiraled into a fatal tragedy. After 2 gamers got into a dispute, one of them enlisted a known swatter to call in a fake hostage situation at an address in Wichita, Kansas. But the address given wasn't even the other players. It belonged to 28-year-old Andrew Finch, an innocent man with no connection to the game. When Finch stepped outside to see what was happening, a police sniper shot him dead within seconds despite Finch being unarmed. The swatter, Tyler Barris, was later sentenced to 20 years in prison, and the city eventually paid Finch's family $5 million. Conan O'Brien's world was rocked in 2024 when both of his parents, married for 66 years, died just 3 days apart. His father passed at 95, followed shortly by his mother at 92, leaving Conan to plan 2 funerals back-to-back before rushing overseas to continue filming Conan O'Brien Must Go. Still reeling from the loss, he was then forced to evacuate Los Angeles due to the raging wildfires. Conan later admitted he spent that entire period in a fugue state, emotionally numb and running on autopilot even as he hosted the Oscars. Tasmanian tiger was hunted to extinction after being falsely blamed for killing sheep, despite having jaws far too weak to take down large prey. The last known thylacine Benjamin froze to death while in captivity in 1936, just 2 months after the species finally gained legal protection. Croatian nurse Hedviga Golic died alone in her apartment in 1966 and was left undiscovered for 42 years. Her mummified remains were finally found in 2008 during renovations, after decades of neighbors assuming she'd simply moved away. Her electricity bills were quietly paid by the building's architect until shortly before her body was found. In 2003, U.S. forces at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq photographed a hooded detainee standing on a box with wires attached to his hands. He was told that if he moved or fell, he would be electrocuted instantly. The man, Ali Shalal Al-Qazi, said he was forced to stand like that for hours at a time over multiple days, never knowing whether the threat was real. He also reported being beaten, electrocuted, sexually assaulted, and left with permanent injuries to his genitals and spine. The photo became one of the most disturbing images of the Iraq War, and a lasting symbol of how far the war on terror had fallen. In 2007, 8-year-old Amarjeet Sada became the world's youngest serial killer after brutally murdering 3 infants, including his own baby sister and cousin, by smashing their skulls with bricks. When finally caught after killing a neighbor's 6-month-old daughter, he confessed with a chilling smile, showing no remorse as he reenacted the murders for police. Even more disturbing, villagers knew about the earlier killings but kept silent to protect his family. Too young for prison under Indian law, Amarjeet was sent to a juvenile facility, then quietly released as an adult with a new identity. The former child killer's current whereabouts are unknown. In February of 1978, 5 friends from Yuba City, California, all with mild mental disabilities or psychiatric conditions, went to watch a college basketball game in Chico and never returned home. The next day, their Mercury Montego was found abandoned on a remote snowy mountain road in the Plumas National Forest. The car wasn't stuck by any means. It was perfectly drivable, had a quarter tank of gas, and showed no signs of mechanical trouble. The keys were gone, and it was parked as if someone expected to come back. It wasn't until 4 months later when melting snow finally revealed the first few bodies. 3 of the men's corpses were found scattered in the forest between the car and a Forest Service trailer 19 miles away. Inside that trailer laid the 4th man, Ted Weir, wrapped in sheets and emaciated to just 120 pounds. He had grown a full beard, suggesting he had survived for weeks, but he starved to death, surrounded by enough canned food to last all 5 men more than a year. The food had been untouched except for a few open tins, and the propane tank outside had never been used to heat the trailer. The 5th man, Gary Mathias, was simply gone. Only his tennis shoes were found near Weir's body, implying he had left the trailer completely barefoot in deep snow. No other trace of him has ever been found. Why they abandoned the warm-stocked cabin, why they split up, and why they went up the mountain in the first place, in the opposite direction from home, all remain a mystery. Some believe they were chased, others think they panicked after a wrong turn, and some suspect Mathias's history of schizophrenia may have played a role. But after nearly 50 years, the case still remains unsolved. In 1965, 16-year-old Sylvia Likens and her sister Jenny were left by their carnival worker parents in the care of 37-year-old Gertrude Baniszewski in Indianapolis for $20 a week. But when the payments began arriving late, Gertrude took her anger out on Sylvia in a sadistic rage. She singled Sylvia out, accused her of being promiscuous, and began systematically breaking her down. Over the next 3 months, Gertrude enlisted her own 7 children and neighborhood kids into the abuse, turning her home into a torture chamber for Sylvia. The girl was beaten daily, burned with cigarettes, scalded with boiling water, and forced to eat her own excrement. She was often stripped of her clothes, humiliated in front of strangers, and forced to perform degrading acts for Gertrude's amusement. Gertrude and her children would eat full meals in front of Sylvia while she sat hungry, often taunting her and dangling food just out of her reach. She was regularly tied up in uncomfortable positions and was eventually banished to the basement, left to lie on a urine-soaked mattress in the dark. By October of 1965, Sylvia's body was so emaciated she could barely stand. At some point in her final days, a heated needle was used to carve into her abdomen the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." After collapsing from brain swelling, internal bleeding, and shock, Sylvia died alone on the filthy basement floor. When police found her body, they described it as one of the most horrific cases of child abuse in American history. Gertrude, 2 of her children, and 2 neighborhood boys were convicted, but none served out their full sentences, some walking free in less than 20 years. If you ever see this in the wild, you're already in big trouble. Caught on a trail cam, this video shows a skunk performing one of nature's most unmistakable warning displays. Before spraying, skunks often stomp their feet, hiss, raise their tail into a massive plume, and may even stand on their front legs in a final attempt to intimidate predators and avoid wasting their spray. If these warnings are ignored, they can accurately spray a foul-smelling liquid up to 15 feet, temporarily blind anything that gets it in its eyes, and leave an overpowering odor that can linger for days. Erling Haaland spent roughly $134,000 to buy the only surviving copy of a rare 1594 edition of Heimskringla, one of Norway's oldest printed history books, preventing the 430-year-old volume from disappearing into a private collection. Instead, he donated it to the library in his hometown of Bryn, where it will be preserved and put on public display permanently so future generations can see one of the country's rarest surviving historical treasures. These tiny stone stars are actually prehistoric fossils. They're the preserved stem segments of sea lilies, marine animals called crinoids that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. When the stems broke apart, they left behind these perfectly star-shaped fossils. This child's robe, made in China over 150 years ago during the Qing dynasty, was known as a 100-family robe. Families throughout a village each donated a small patch of fabric, with every piece symbolizing protection, blessings, and good fortune. So the child quite literally wore the support of the entire community. This massive Olmec stone head lay buried beneath the jungle for centuries until archaeologists uncovered it in the 1950s at San Lorenzo, Mexico. Weighing up to 20 tons, these colossal stone heads were carved over 3,000 years ago and hauled for miles without wheels or animals. To this day, no one knows exactly how the Olmec moved them or why so many of them were deliberately buried. A deformed raccoon named Jimothy has gone viral after roaming Seattle with what experts believe to be short spine syndrome, a rare congenital condition that severely compresses the spine. Animals born with the disorder often struggle to survive in the wild because reduced mobility can make it harder to escape predators, find food, climb trees, and compete with healthier animals, with many never reaching adulthood. Despite those overwhelming odds, Jimothy appears remarkably healthy and agile, but every day in the wild remains a fight for survival, making him an unlikely symbol of resilience. This photo shows soccer legend Diego Maradona wearing a no-drugs jersey in 1993 after returning from a 15-month suspension for testing positive for cocaine. By then, his addiction had already destroyed his legendary career at Napoli, led to a police raid on his home, and resulted in his arrest for drug possession. Just a year later, he was expelled from the 1994 World Cup after another failed drug test, ending his international career, and a third failed test in 1997 brought his playing career to a humiliating close. Even after retiring, his health only continued to collapse. He suffered a cocaine-related heart attack in 2000, was hospitalized with severe hepatitis in 2004, and endured multiple life-threatening medical emergencies before dying of heart failure in 2020, just weeks after brain surgery, with prosecutors later claiming negligent medical care contributed to his death. Here's a photo of one of the deadliest wild animals on Earth. Known as Dorbe, the rogue bull elephant has been linked to at least 25 human deaths in Nepal since 2010. In 2012, he trampled a husband and wife to death near Chitwan National Park, forcing his devastated son to move nearly 9 miles away across 2 rivers in hope that they'd never cross paths with him again. But 14 years later, Dorbe found them, raiding their home and killing the man's 25-year-old daughter-in-law and 4-year-old grandson, bringing the same family's death toll up to 4. The attacks have unfolded amid a growing human-elephant conflict, as shrinking habitat and growing villages have pushed elephants into closer contact with people. Despite being shot, fitted with multiple tracking collars, and closely monitored for years, Dorbe remains alive, and the surviving father now says, "There's nowhere left for us to run." Here's some terrifying footage from one of the most horrific flood disasters imaginable. After catastrophic flooding struck southern China in July of 2026, a snake breeding farm was destroyed, releasing about 900 snakes, including venomous cobras and kraits, into nearby villages. As residents waded through chest-deep floodwater, authorities warned that deadly snakes could be hiding just beneath the surface. Hospitals rushed to stock with antivenom, emergency teams were deployed to hunt the escaped reptiles, and several people were reportedly bitten while clearing flood debris. The flooding itself killed at least 39 people and forced 130,000 residents to evacuate. That is horrible. What the f? Country singer Mindy McCready shot to fame after her 1996 debut album 10,000 Angels sold over 2 million copies. But then her life quickly spiraled into years of addiction, abusive relationships, legal troubles, and mental health crisis. In January of 2013, her longtime boyfriend died by suicide in the Arkansas home they shared, leaving her completely devastated. Just 2 weeks later, she lost custody of her 2 young sons. Just days later, after killing the family's dog, McCready died by suicide at just 37 years old, ending one of country music's most tragic and heartbreaking stories. Lisa Reed had been completely blind for 13 years after a childhood tumor damaged her optic nerve, relying on a guide dog to navigate everyday life. But one night in November of 2000, she accidentally banged her head on a coffee table while trying to bend down to kiss her guide dog goodnight, then woke up the next morning able to see again. Doctors confirmed she'd regained about 80% of her vision in one eye but could offer no medical explanation, calling it a miracle unlike anything they'd ever seen. One of the most emotional moments came when she saw her younger brother for the first time since he was a child, telling him in amazement, "My brother's a man," before later sharing her extraordinary story in her memoir, Angel Eyes. Here's some amazing footage of one of the rarest birds on Earth coming face to face with another of its own kind. This is the kagu, a bird found only on the island of New Caledonia, where fewer than 2,000 of them are believed to remain in the wild. Unlike most birds, kagus can barely fly, instead relying on dramatic crest displays and synchronized dances like this to communicate, defend territory, and strengthen pair bonds. Conservation efforts have helped bring the species back from the brink of extinction, making sightings like this possible once again. Here's a clip of what's believed to be the largest gathering of orcas ever filmed. The incredible scene was captured by Tony Meyer off the coast of northern Norway, where hundreds of killer whales converge to feed on massive schools of herring. Rather than hunting alone, the orcas work together to herd the fish into massive bait balls before taking turns feeding, creating one of the most spectacular predator gatherings ever recorded. Despite being apex predators capable of taking down great white sharks and even other whales, there are no confirmed cases of wild orcas intentionally killing a human. The only fatal orca attacks on humans have happened in captivity. Justin Roiland, the original voice of Rick and Morty, saw his career collapse after a wave of disturbing allegations. In 2020, he was charged with felony domestic battery and false imprisonment. And though the case was dismissed in 2023 for a lack of evidence, Adult Swim, Hulu, and his own gaming studio had already severed ties. That same year, new accusations surfaced of sexual assault, inappropriate contact with underage girls, and toxic workplace behavior, including lewd messages to colleagues. Once the celebrated co-creator of Rick and Morty, Roiland's reputation is now defined by scandal, and with seasons 7 and 8 already recast, the show has clearly moved on without him, with no indication that he'll ever return. In 2010, 4-year-old Paulette Habara Farah mysteriously vanished from her home in Mexico. For 9 days, authorities and her family searched everywhere, her case dominating headlines across the country. But the shocking discovery came right in her own bedroom, where she was found dead, wedged between the mattress and bed frame in a spot where investigators supposedly checked. Even more disturbing, her own mother had slept in that bed during the search without realizing Paulette's body was beneath her. Officials ruled it an accident, but countless inconsistencies fueled suspicions of foul play, turning her death into one of Mexico's most disturbing and controversial cases.